You've got questions? I've got answers. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking, presented by Betway. If you're going to place a bet, bet on Betway. 19 plus, please play responsibly. If you're watching us on the Daily Faceoff YouTube channel, please give us a like and subscribe to get some more content coming out your way. But this week, we're going to do something a little bit different on Frankly Speaking. No guest. In a way, I'm the guest on my own show because I'm taking questions from you guys. Over the holiday break, I solicited some questions on Twitter or X and got so many that, I don't know, I can't possibly get to them all, but let's dive in. Some fun, some frivolous, some serious, some about inside the life of being an insider. Let's dive into that mailbag. We'll start with a question from JT, who asks, assuming Ovi breaks the all-time goal record, will other untouchable records stand the test of time? And if not, what do you think will be surpassed next? All right, so Alex Ovechkin will break the NHL's goal scoring record. I'm going to say he does it this season. He's highly motivated to do so. And by the way, how unbelievable would it be, the drama, especially if we don't have playoff races this year, to have that happen in the last few weeks of the season, to have that chase be on? He's really not that far away. So what unbreakable records are out there? Look, I'll rattle off a few that I think will never be broken. The easiest one is Glenn Hall's 502 consecutive games played in net. Think about it this way. Mr. Goalie, 502 consecutive games in net. Goalies in the NHL rarely start 2 games in a row. They don't start back-to-backs anymore. There's no one ever going to get to 100 games consecutively, let alone 502. It's mind-blowing, especially to think that he played in an era without helmets. How about Wayne Gretzky's 50 goals in 39 games? I don't think we're ever going to see that again. Timo Solani's 76 goals scored as a rookie. How about Ron Hextall's 113 penalty minutes in 1988-89 as a goalie? Yeah, there's quite a few fun, unbreakable NHL records, but I'll give you one that probably will be broken. I'm going to say Connor McDavid becomes just the second player ever to Wayne Gretzky to score 2,000 points. So the old adage of if Wayne Gretzky never scored a single goal in the NHL, that he would still be the NHL's leading point getter with 1,800 plus assists. I think that stat will change, certainly. Thanks to JT for the question. This one is from SportsMag416 in Toronto. He says, what's the most noticeable difference between Sheldon Keefe and Craig Berube that has immediately impacted the Leafs for the best and worst so far? I think it's all been pretty good so far. One thing that I'll notice with Craig Berube is attention to detail. Not to say that they didn't have it under Sheldon Keefe, but I think this team is so much cleaner coming out of their own end. It seems like they pressure a bit more than they did under Sheldon Keefe in their end. And also just some of the changes that they made personnel-wise. Oliver Ekman-Larsson and Chris Tanev coming in, I think, have significantly changed this team. I think they're going to be put in a better position to succeed when it comes the postseason. A little bit less heavy lifting, less dependability on that offense, which I think could probably go a long way. I'll also say one personality change too, and I do think that this rubs off on teams, is the idea that Craig Berube's pretty stoic. Not to say he's not intense or not fired up, but it just seemed like Sheldon Keefe was so emotional and emotionally charged that when you see him freaking out on referees or whatever it might be, I just think the way the coach goes is a lot of times the way the team goes. So if you're overexcited and not in control, your team might not be either. And I think that's one additional layer that Craig Berube has provided to the Toronto Maple Leafs. But Sheldon Keefe has obviously done a fantastic job in New Jersey, and I think you're always probably better as a coach the second time around. Let's go to Ryan Mead in New York, who asks, could you eat one Swedish meatball a minute for 60 minutes for $50,000? I mean, I would do it for a lot less than that, Ryan, and I think I could. I did go to the original spot in Stockholm last year during the Global Series, Pelican. Highly recommend you check that out. I had a fantastic meal there with my pal Sean McKenzie, and just to try the original Swedish meatballs, so good. This is from Ryan Umet, who asks, what are your thoughts on goalie interference? Seems like teams are taking advantage of pushing the offensive player into the goalie, knowing the chance is very high that the goal might be called back. Ryan, I don't know if that's actually a thought process from the defenders, is let's throw this guy into our goalie and see what happens. But I will say that it seems like we've gone the other way in goalie interference. Like, to me, it should have been egregious that a goal gets called back for goalie interference. Now, it feels like anytime these guys are potentially out of the blue paint by inches, or whatever it might be, it's gone too far the other direction. The goalies seem to be protected more than ever. And I'm not advocating for a free-for-all, but to me, I don't think the game was really broken before, and now you find it where the slightest touch, the slightest pad movement, the stick gets knocked out of the way, whatever it is, it feels like there's less of an onus, from my point of view, on the goalie to actually fight through some of that to make the save. And we see some of the first reactions from goalies now after goals that kind of impact, I think, the way the coach is thinking on the bench is, how did the goalie react to it? Is he throwing his arms up in the air? Is he saying that this should be a call? I think that's something to keep in mind. But I'd like to see less reviews from both an offside and goalie interference point of view. And I think the fewer reviews we can have, the better. Gary Bettman warned the GMs when video review was put in place that they're opening Pandora's box. And that's kind of what I feel like we're doing now, having to look and squint so hard for stuff that should be pretty, first glance, what's your gut reaction? This is from the Brat Pack 63, who likes to chirp me occasionally on Twitter. He says, why did you have Jesper Bratt on your trade block for 2 seasons in a row when everyone involved with the Devils and his camp all said that he was never even close to being on the table? Now, I understand this might hurt, given that you're obviously clearly a huge Jesper Bratt fan, and he's been unbelievable this season. Not to say he hasn't been good in the past, but it feels like he's taken his game to even another level. I do think Tom Fitzgerald and the Devils, despite some of those denials that you heard publicly, had just wanted to go through the process of understanding what the market might be. I think that they had some talks with the Toronto Maple Leafs a few seasons ago. I don't think it ever really went far down the track, but just the fact that he was testing the waters to understand Bratt's value, to me, was enough to put him on my trade targets board. Sometimes, you get information like that, it seems far-fetched or might seem like that to the average fan. There's always things that come across my desk that might surprise you, and I can tell you, a few years later after the fact, that it was 100% authentic. This is from Joshua, who asks, when will the entry draft move to 19-year-olds? Rebuilds are difficult when picking 18-year-olds. Couldn't agree more. It's a total imperfect science in the NHL, Joshua. You're picking 18-year-olds trying to project what they're going to be at 23. That's really hard to do. I think one additional year would be good for all the parties involved. One, it puts less of an onus and emphasis on having to find the perfect situation, especially now with the changing college hockey and junior hockey landscape. Don't worry so much about, hey, am I getting to the place that I absolutely need to be? Focus on development, and it takes some heat off of families and teenagers that are trying to make decisions really kind of as 14-year-olds in terms of what path they're going to go down, and also would provide all NHL teams one additional year of information gathering. There's so few 18-year-olds that are ready for the NHL. I don't think it's going to damage. There's certainly a handful of players every decade that are just bona fide, step into the NHL stars. Connor McDavid, Austin Matthews, etc. Like, you can go through the list. Macklin Celebrini is the only 18-year-old left in the league this year. It's not easy to do, and they're so rare that maybe you could provide a way to have some kind of exceptional status. But even for that player, let's say Macklin Celebrini went through the process last year, played at BU first as a 17-year-old, then as an 18-year-old, so he arrived early. But then what would you do this extra year before the draft? Well, go take the Austin Matthews route. Go play against men in Europe somewhere. Go do something a little bit different that would provide you, or of course, stay at college and enjoy another year. Point being, it's not going to hurt players to stay one extra year, even though it might impact their earnings, because that sample size of players that step into the NHL is so small. But also, I think teams would enjoy the extra year of information gathering to make more informed decisions and could be way better off for it in the long haul. I think the fact that we only see about 18% of draft picks of all 7 rounds of draft picks make it to play in an NHL game, and 82% that are picked never play an NHL game. It feels to me like you probably need to overhaul the system. It's not that teams are horrible at it. It's just that it's kind of more or less like throwing darts at a dartboard. This comes from Pat Pascal, and thank you to Pat for your service. He says, do the Sabres need to sell the team in order to fix their problem? You know, I really struggle with this question because I think on one hand, when you look at the path that the Sabres have gone down under Terry Pegula, he buys the team in 2011. They make the playoffs that year, and they were already on the path. The purchase didn't close until February. So they make the playoffs the first year of his tenure, and what's followed has been a 13-year, soon-to-be 14-year playoff drought that will tie the New York Jets for the longest current playoff drought in North American pro sports. You look at that and say, yeah, some of that obviously has to be connected to the owner. How come one of the most successful teams in the NHL, even though they hadn't won a Stanley Cup, how come they had sort of been a perennial, playoff contender or a team that was always in the mix in Buffalo? You knew you weren't getting easy nights with such a proud fan base too, a true loyal hockey market. How come things have gone so sideways? But then I look at the other end of that and I say, Terry Pegula has invested a ton of money in this team. He's been a generous guy. The Sabres have some of the best facilities going in the NHL. For the most part, players are really treated well there. They like going there. The things that they haven't liked are that the team on the ice hasn't been competitive. So how much of that has to do with the owner? Is he overbearing? Is he not involved enough? I don't really have a firm sense on that one way or the other. I'd say if you were to chart all the owners in the NHL based on guys that are in there every day asking questions on the Tom Dundon's, that side of it, in Carolina being super, super involved versus someone like a Jeff Vinik in Tampa who's, very hands off, I would probably chart the Sabres somewhere in the middle. So he's provided resources, he's provided stability, and he's obviously got deep pockets. The Buffalo Bills have sort of been one of the model NFL teams the last few years. Why is it that the Sabres can't get out of their own way? I don't really have an answer for that. It just feels like right now they've arrived at this juncture where they know that they need to make moves and don't really know where to turn next. And that part has probably handcuffed this team in the meantime. Fish Dancer asks, have you had any serious threats come your way from releasing insider information? I have had a few run-ins on social media, believe it or not. I had one guy who sent a series of really threatening and specific direct messages. He named my kids by name while they were still babies too. I think he said something, I won't forget it. He said something like he wanted to take my kids and name them specifically, which I don't even know how he got their names, and said that he wanted to rip their heads off and punt them like footballs. And then sent a whole series of other messages, including about where I lived. And unfortunately, that guy, he got a little knock on the door from police in his hometown. So that followed up in pretty short order with an apology. And it was weird because he was a first-time dad, too. So I don't know why you'd act that way in general, but let alone as a new dad to threaten someone else's kids. But that was, I think, just for normal course of business, not even necessarily insider information. I did break a story in which I did get a very cryptic call one time from someone who told me to, quote, knock it off. And in case you're wondering, it wasn't the Seattle expansion draft. And we'll get to that in a minute because I know there were some other questions about that as well. But from time to time, I guess sometimes you do rub people the wrong way. And to that I say, please touch grass. This one is from Glenn Keeping. He says, with Arizona now in Utah, if another team starts to fail, are there ready-made markets available, including ownership, rink, enough local TV rights? Not a good look to be in college rinks, minor league ballparks, or shrinking TV viewership in the other 3 sports. Agree, Glenn. And what I would say now is it's kind of a breath of fresh air or a sigh of relief for the NHL because there are no hotspots. Every team is really in good shape. I mean, think back to not just last year, but 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you would have been asking the same questions before Vinny Viola came in about the Florida Panthers, or look at what the Tampa Bay Lightning, a true model of success, have been under Jeff Vinik. Now the team has been sold the majority share of the team, and new owners are coming in the next few years. I can't think of one team that's kind of in trouble, so to speak, but if you were to pinpoint potential landing spots if someone were to get into trouble at some point. And I wouldn't buy it necessarily on a team like the Winnipeg Jets. Their main owner, or one of their owners, I should say, David Thompson, is one of the richest men in the world, let alone Canada. They can withstand whatever issues they run into in Winnipeg, and it seems like attendance and everything else has rebounded pretty nicely with that team playing well. So I would say no hot spots, and if you're looking for potential landing spots, Houston is a ready-made turnkey operation if you needed it to be. Big market, transient market. Yes, in Texas, another Sunbelt city, it would be one of the biggest markets in the U.S. I think it's number 4 or 5 in terms of population. And they're in a spot where they could take that arena where the Houston Rockets play. They upgraded their ice plant recently. You could plop a team there for need be, even if on a temporary basis. You'd probably also look at Atlanta if one of those competing ownership groups could get an arena built. So Atlanta is probably next in line for expansion, and we'll figure out the rest from there. This one's from Turpin19, who says, we've seen insiders and media in other sports get front office jobs. If you got offered a GM spot or another front office gig from any NHL team, would you consider taking it? I have been offered a front office job. I can't say the team or what the position was, but it was in the last 18 months or so. I did consider it, and I think in the end, I'm really happy with what I do. I love being at Daily Faceoff, and I love what we've built here with our network and the Nation Network, and I'd like to see that continue on and continue to grow. So it was certainly appealing, the idea to join a team, have teammates, and have a chance to win. I'm a competitive guy. I'd love to have some skin in the game and see if what I could provide would help a team. That said, really just happy with my current situation, and I was flattered that to even have a conversation just like that. Bowie Puck asks, do you text or call sources? Wondering if people avoid text, so what they leak can't be proven in writing. And question 2, how did you manage to leak the entire Kraken expansion roster ahead of the broadcast? Did it all come from one source? Bowie Puck, we don't talk about sources here. Can't divulge any of that information. How did I manage to leak it? I guess I push back against the term leak. What I would call that is reporting. And I think the NHL recognizes the mistake that was made, and that they had a lot of this information floating out there for a period of time. When teams have to make selections and then they call the player, who then calls his teammates or texts a group text, or then calls his agent, or then all of a sudden, and family and friends, the information starts to get out. So what I'll tell you is didn't come from one person, came from many people who, you go through the process of trying to cross off each team and which player was selected from that team. It didn't really become all that difficult given the amount of time available. It wasn't like you had 30 minutes or 60 minutes to do the work. Some players had to be on flights to be brought into Seattle for the expansion draft party itself. And so while that part was difficult and trying to, maintain relationships and make sure that you try and keep everyone happy, at the end of the day, my job isn't to wait for people to put out the release. If I wait until teams want to announce stuff or the league wants to announce stuff, what exactly is the point of my job? What am I doing here? Because at that point, you'd have it from them anyway. So the whole point is to be a reporter and report stuff whenever it is that you receive it, so long as it's accurate and credible. So I didn't really receive a ton of pushback. I did receive a message from someone, a well-placed league executive, who just asked me, hey, could you maybe save some suspense? We understand that you're doing your job, but we do have a show tonight. And I just try and be respectful of all involved. I've got a job to do. They do as well. The players and the team, they want some confidentiality. It's a push and pull, but I think if you go into it with a healthy amount of respect, that Hopefully in the end, there isn't too much damage done. And hopefully, I know some Seattle fans were bothered, but hopefully fans of other teams that were losing players, maybe they wanted that information. If you have to pick a team that will win 2 cups within the next 10 years, what is that team? That's from Kruger Industrial Smoothing. So I'm going to go with some low-hanging fruit here, and I'm going to say the Edmonton Oilers. First off, I think it's a matter of when and not if that Connor McDavid wins a Stanley Cup and Leon Draisaitl. And then once that happens, to me, another one could follow in relatively short order. If not back-to-back, I think that team's going to remain in contender mode. And look, they've already had a ton of interest from players and free agents. Everyone wants to be part of a winner. And so Edmonton has gone from this team that was on so many no-trade lists to a team where they're a favored destination. People want a chance to play alongside the best players in the world. And I think that will only help their case. And plus, you see the environment and the support that they get in Edmonton. Yes, winters are cold, but players are treated like gold there. And I just think they've got something special going. You see this team very mature this year. Tough start to the year again. No problem at all. Back to playing some really good hockey. And I like what they've got. And so if I had to pick and bet on a team to win 2 Stanley Cups within the next 10 years, I think Connor McDavid, he's not going to end his career first off without one. He's going to be a multi-time Stanley Cup winner. Sean McIntosh asks, what would happen to a team who purposely disregarded the cap and spent whatever they wanted on players? What would happen to them if they ignored the punishment and continued to ice the same team? Well, Sean, the true answer is you can't. You'd have to ice a team, you have to be cap compliant. And if not, you have to shorten your roster on any given day and ice a team that is cap compliant. So one thing that people kind of lose sight of with the NHL salary cap, yes, this season it's $88 million, but it's calculated on a daily basis. So each player basically has their salary divided by 100 and I think it's 94 days this year. And all of those daily salaries kind of add up to whatever your 88 million is divided by 194. As long as you're under that number, your team is cap compliant for that day. Some days you spend more and it takes some out of the bank. Some days you spend less and you're able to accrue some cap space. So it's all calculated on a daily basis. So the answer is they wouldn't approve transactions. You couldn't go trade for a player or make a deal that doesn't have your roster cap compliant. There's no real time to sign free agents, obviously, of course, in season. So it's kind of hard to get outside of that. But if so, you have to shorten your roster. And if something were to happen beyond that, the commissioner, of course, could step in and you'd either have to forfeit games or forfeit points, whatever it might be. It's a hard salary cap, and it means just that. There's no wiggle room around it one way or the other, despite some of the LTIR nonsense that we see. This one comes from Oilers Always 97, who says, I've always been fascinated with trades, deadline day, GMs gathering on the draft floor, wondering who exactly and what potential picks they're talking about. How many of your contacts are actual GMs and how many are assistants, scouts, or insiders? No names, just numbers. Thanks. It's varied. I mean, I'm not going to share too much information, but what I will say is a lot of the people that I talk to are right at the very top of organizations. Of course, we've got a varied list of contacts, and you never know sometimes where news comes from. It could come from some of the craziest of places. I will say that. And sometimes your job is to run down or check on something that comes across your plate that you least expected and where it came from. I take information from anywhere. I don't report it from anywhere. You've got to go to the top and confirm those either with one source right at the top, or if it's someone that's more a mid-level or entry-level employee, that's something that you'd want to double check with multiple sources to make sure that you're reporting only the most accurate information. This one is from Not That Jake, who's in Abbotsford, British Columbia. He asks, completely personal thought and not what are you hearing, but what do you think the Canucks should do with Elias Pettersson and JT Miller? My response would be tell them to grow up. I know that sounds funny to say. It's not a flippant answer, though, because they're adults. This is professional sports. This is any normal workplace. Wherever you work, whether you work at a bank, you're a police officer, you're in construction, whatever it is, there's going to be someone that you work with that you don't get along with or see eye to eye with. That's life. Same with on any team, 23 people, there's bound to be some personalities in the room that just don't jibe. These two players have been playing together for a long time, since 2019. We didn't hear about any of this stuff when the Canucks were winning last year. And yeah, do frustrations boil over? Do sometimes these guys, have enough and say, I can't take it anymore? Maybe. But both of these guys signed 8-year deals knowing that the other one was there and probably likely would be there for a while. I think there's probably some push and pull on both sides that they need to change. JT Miller is a highly emotional, his pilot light burns bright. He's one of the most intense and fierce competitors in the league. And I'm sure that at sometimes he can be critical and wear on teammates. This is not my assessment. This is from teammates that are in the room. And on the other end of that, you've got Pettersson, who's probably more of an introvert, definitely wants to win, highly skilled, competitive, wants to do well, but can also be sarcastic. And at times that can wear on people. So, look, two totally different people and players from different backgrounds. I think the solution here is you don't need to be best friends. You just need to find a way to work together and find some kind of common ground. I'm confident that they can do that. I don't know how this spiraled out of control into a one or the other. All I can tell you is if that's ultimately what ends up happening and it does become one or the other, the biggest loser in that will be the Vancouver Canucks. Dan Marcus in New Jersey asks, what specifically do you provide to NHL GMs, scouts, assistant GMs, and coaches that, quote, motivates them to provide you with inside information about their organizations? It's a good question, Dan, and I get that a lot. And the way I think about what I do philosophically is you've always got to bring something to the table. It can't just be take. And so a lot of times my conversations are I'm providing insight and information from what I'm hearing from 31 other teams when I'm talking to a GM. I can talk about the market, some of the players that are available that might be under the radar, some situations that I know about, different players or coaching staffs, people who are happy, unhappy. There's always sort of speculation and rumor out there that you can pass along that, I'm gathering from other people and then sharing all of that on this sort of information superhighway, so to speak. So, I'm kind of a filter of information. I have a lot that's, sort of in my notebook, in my arsenal. And, GMs, agents, scouts, coaches, whoever it might be, can bounce some questions off of me, and I can bring something to the table that hopefully provides them something that they otherwise wouldn't be able to get. And so, in return, I'm asking, hey, what are you thinking with this guy or that guy? How do you view this situation? Give me the general information and insight on your team. So not all of it's transaction-based. Some of it is also just, hey, I'm someone that when push comes to shove, that when you talk to me that I can present accurately what it is that your organization is thinking or feeling. And so that's the other part of it, is to be a trusted voice and not to say that whatever they tell me is what I say, but that they know that when they tell me something and it's honest and it's accurate, that it's going to be delivered in an honest and accurate way. And so that's the other part of it. So two things: provide information. The other side is be someone that can be trusted with, sending out a message, so to speak, of how a team or organization views a certain situation, which sometimes when things are happening, I hope can be valuable. This is a related question, and great username, by the way, Jacques Strap. He asks a two-parter. How much do you hear that you are unable to report? And two, do you think the Leafs make a bigger move this year or offseason, or will go for smaller moves? I'll start with the first one since it was kind of related. I think the best insiders in the world, the people that I grew up learning from and have either mentored me or I've watched from afar, they probably, what you're seeing and hearing publicly is only 5 or 10% of what they know, and they keep the other 90 or 95% to themselves. I'd like to think that I'm like that. I'd say I'm probably closer to 80 or 85% that I try and keep to myself, but there's always a lot happening behind the scenes that just never sees the light of day, and that's kind of what makes this job interesting. It's kind of what also makes this job really stressful, because you're also dealing with competitors. You're dealing with a marketplace that needs constant feeding. You're feeding the wolf every day in terms of trying to generate and create content. And the hard part is keeping a lot of what you have back because you were asked to not share it. And that trust factor is a huge part of this job. Now, do you think the Leafs make a bigger move this year? I do think that they're going to try and push as hard as they can, given the spot that this team is in with the players in their prime, that this, again, maybe sort of one last chance with this core as we currently see it, especially given the contractual status of Mitch Marner. I don't know exactly what that's going to be quite yet. We know that the Leafs need to overhaul their third line. They could probably use another defender. Maybe even a power play guy on the blue line that could really come in and make life a lot easier for their forwards. So I think there's still a few things going on. And by the way, we got to monitor also the health of their goaltenders. We talked about going into this year that they're a team that just hasn't had goalies that have gone the distance in full seasons before. And now we're seeing this Stolarz injury, yet I think a third or fourth different knee surgery for him in his career, even though this is a minor procedure. Certainly something to keep in mind. So a bunch of different facets of the Leafs that they could improve on, but Brad Treliving is always trying to take the bat off of his shoulder and take a swing. Dan the Fan in Toronto asks, do you consider yourself the new Bob McKenzie? And if so, what margarita or other drink are you going to pioneer as the next great drink mix? Is it the Seravalli Sambuca or Frankie Grappa, perhaps? Great questions, Dan. There's only one, the true original, the hockey insider in Bob McKenzie. Everyone else is just an imposter, no offense. And there will never be anyone like Bob. I can only hope to be, some part of what Bob was to the hockey media world. Just a giant and a giant of a man. So lucky to call him a friend and mentor. I can't even begin to express to you how unbelievably kind he was to me as a teammate and someone who actually helped get me to TSN, which is probably a longer story for another day. Just an unbelievable prince of a man, and I miss working with him, to be honest. It's great to still keep in touch with him, the occasional hilarious text message or story, or I'll get a call from him every now and again. And the booze mogul as well. I don't know that I have that in me to shepherd into a product into the industry, but Lord knows I'd be willing to sample. Alex Wheeler asks a simple one. How did you gain the trust of executives so quickly? The answer to that is it wasn't quick. It takes a long time. I'd say if I were let's just say I were to change over into another sport. If I wanted to go become an NFL insider, I would ballpark Alex that having no connections and just starting out in the industry, I would need at least 8 to 10 years to build up a book of contacts of people. And it all depends on a number of things, platform, trust factor. What's your experience? It's not quick. It takes a really, really long time. It takes showing up to a lot of events, meeting people, networking, reaching out, contacting people that you don't know, or you'd like to build a relationship. Even in the NHL, there's constantly new people that are coming in that I don't know. A new head coach here, a new GM there. Sometimes these guys are promoted. Sometimes these guys are coming over from other teams that then land with new ones. And you hope, hey, maybe that guy that I've built a relationship with for the past 6 years, he's in a new role and maybe, our relationship will blossom. It's always evolving. It is something that I can't explain it. It takes just a really long time to just day after day, constantly, being seen, seeing other people and showing people that you're not a robot. Personal conversations really go a long way. And I don't mean that to waste anyone's time, but, find out what makes people tick. Have a chance to BS with someone at the rink at a morning skate or before a game or while you're eating dinner in the media room, like whatever it might be. I've just tried to kind of always go that extra mile to develop a relationship as someone that can be seen, that, is not out to get anyone, just is out to have the most accurate and interesting information and to keep, to keep those relationships going. And there's people that I talk to still today that are no longer in positions of power, that we're constantly, people that don't even work in the industry anymore. You become friends with people, different walks of life, and that's also what makes this business and this job so fun and interesting. Chris Garrix in Hamilton, Ontario asks, what advice would you give to someone trying to break into the industry and work towards getting in with an established network? As a journalist kind of spinning his wheels, I'd like to know how to best utilize my skills. Well, Chris, I just answered some of that to Alex's question. Part of it is just showing up. Somehow find a way to get your hands on a credential, get in the rink, get in the locker room, talk to players, talk to coaches. Eventually, if you can network and get some phone numbers, talk to some GMs, talk to team presidents, talk to agents, talk to people, read. That's the other thing I would impress upon any young hockey fan that wants to become a reporter. Get as much information in your brain as you possibly can. Scroll through all of the clips every day that are written, hundreds of articles written every day. Start with the Professional Hockey Writers Association, our feed on Twitter. Read reputable media coverage. That's the best way to get accurate information. I'm not talking about, fans spouting off on social media. I'm talking about true reputable coverage. And it's not really hard to find. Media literacy is such a big thing in today's sports and overall world landscape. Is I don't think people, they want to just run with hearsay or rumors, or there's always some conspiracy theory. Understanding how information is disseminated and where you're getting that information from is a huge part of this business. And if you can be one of those trusted voices that, trust me, when you show up in the rink and you're writing about a team, that GM is seeing the clips every day. The coaching staff is seeing the clips every day. When I first started, I would occasionally get an article that was ripped out of the paper with some highlights and comments on the margins from Flyers coach Peter Laviolette when I was the Flyers beat reporter, or whoever it might be. They're following every word that you say, and your accurate coverage, your, again, willingness to show up, be there every day, grind, got to grind at it. And when you do that, the respect and the trust and the relationship just evolves from there. So, that part, you can always find a way to just get your foot in the door. That's the hardest part. And then show up every day, be accountable, and be someone that people can talk to. And you never know where life can take you. This one is from Den Polland. He's an Oiler fan. He says, what was the biggest trade or transaction you knew about that you never got to break because it fell apart last minute? So this did fall apart, but I'll tell you a funny story about how I made a mistake on one. I forget what trade deadline it was, but it was maybe 2018 or 2019, maybe 2020, maybe just before the pandemic. Anywhere, somewhere in that time frame. And I was not an insider, so to speak. That wasn't my title, but I was working at TSN as a senior hockey reporter. And with that, occasionally I would have a scoop here or there to contribute during the trade deadline show. And I remember I got a really good tip, and they said, hey, check out Zach Parise. This is obviously before the buyout. Check Zach Parise going from Minnesota to the New York Islanders. And I was thinking, Zach Parise, how are they going to get out of that contract? Anyway, I was told, don't mention it. Keep your mouth shut. I can remember Darren Dreger was like, look, we're going to come to you and we're going to talk about what you've got, but you've really got to soft pedal it. And you could just say something like, Minnesota seems to be working on something with the Islanders, but don't mention specifics. And the reason not to mention specifics were because usually Lou Lamoriello has a standing rule with the people he does business with, and he says, if this leaks, if this gets out, it's over. It's done. So I triple checked the information, and I went to someone high up in one of the organizations, and I said, hey, I'm hearing that you're working on this player, Zach Parise, going from Minnesota to the Islanders. And the response I got back in text message was, how the bleep do you know that? ? And usually when you get something like that, that's when you know you're on the case. So they come to us. I'm kind of unprepared. I don't have a seat at the desk with the insiders. And I was given these marching orders by Darren Dreger, and he says, all right, keep this kind of quiet. Like, play it straight. So I think it was Bob or Gord Miller or someone, they teed me up and they said, and Frank, you seem to be working on something with Minnesota. What's happening there? And I just froze. I didn't know what to do. And I just blurted out the whole thing. I was like, seems like Minnesota is working on a trade to send Zach Parise from Minnesota to the Islanders. And I remember Dregs just turned around and looks up at me because I'm standing right behind him. He's like, what the F are you doing? And I was like, oh, my heart was in my throat because I knew I said too much. And think about some of the things that we just talked about that I just said you can't do. You got to keep your cards close to your vest at times and wait till you get a transaction to get it over the finish line. I was just a little bit too much, a little bit too antsy. And of course, that deal ended up falling apart. Some people said it was because of the money. They couldn't make the money equal, changing sides, which I understand because of Parise's contract. And by the way, he did end up becoming a New York Highlander, of course. But part of it was because some people wondered if because Parise's name got out with the Islanders, that's ultimately where Lou Lamoriello quashed it. I don't know. We'll never know. But that's a pretty interesting example of one that I didn't get to break, a fun, hey, Frank's still learning the ropes here kind of thing. That certainly a lesson learned the hard way. This one's from Matt Bergen. He says, why is the NHL and its players obsessed with tax rates? I never hear it mentioned in coverage of other sports. Huge free agents go to high tax jurisdictions in other sports, but this is so important to NHL players that it needs to be a CBA issue, ? Matt, I think you're right. I think a lot of the tax coverage is overblown. I will say one of the key differentiators is because you're dealing with a border, right? You're dealing with a Canada taxation, system that's just totally different, definitely more stringent. And also you're sometimes dealing with Canadian residents coming south of the border and U.S. residents coming north of the border that I think just complicates things. Certainly for U.S. residents going north, it just adds an extra layer to it that I think makes it more complex. And I would say the other thing too is I just think there's a lot of nuance to it that isn't easily understood. If you have a really good accountant, and there's a few of them that service, huge chunks of NHL players, you can make a lot of the money equal itself out no matter which jurisdiction you're in. But it's just that sort of initial, hey, what hits your account? That's the calculation that people do, and sometimes players are swayed by that, and it's for sure an advantage for teams that are in no state income tax or lower income tax jurisdictions that just makes life a bit easier. The other thing too to keep in mind though is if you're a Canadian and you're playing in Canada, you're earning US dollars and spending them in Canadian. So that is a 30+% with the way the Canadian dollar has dropped, a 30% discount on all of your shopping that you're doing. So you're really making money hand over fist. That it's another thing that I don't think is pointed out too often, but I agree with you. I think, teams want to see it adjusted and there'd be an easy calculation to do. But I think in the end, if you've got a good good accountant that can navigate that tax system, then you're probably in pretty good shape. Steve T wants to know if a team starts a period on the power play, should the faceoff be moved from center ice to the offensive zone? And if a player ends OT in the box, should he be eligible to participate in the shootout? Steve, I agree on both accounts. If a team starts on the power play, the faceoff should be moved to the offensive zone. Just like if a team starts a period on the power play after intermission, there's nothing worse than a team gets a power play with 20 seconds left in the end of the first period. So that means they have 1:40 for their next power play. But why are we starting the next period at center ice just because? That's what tradition has been, is you got to start the period at center ice. No, start it in the offensive zone. Give this team a chance to set up and get their power play going. That would add some urgency, and it would probably also increase the success rate of power plays that start a period with a clean sheet of ice, which sometimes can be really beneficial. I think that's a change that needs to be made, and I'll say in general, the NHL should be thinking as much outside the box as possible. why has attendance and why have ratings gone up in Major League Baseball? Perhaps the most traditional game of all the major four pro sports. Not to say the NHL has been in the dark ages or anything like that. Their big change was 20 years ago with the reduction of clutching and grabbing coming out of the lockout. And the game is in a pretty good place the way that it's played. But can it be better? Can we make tweaks that throw tradition out the window? I think that's a great example of one really small one that could go potentially a long way. There's got to be a dozen others. So thanks to Steve for the question. Six High Eclipse asks, who will be the coach of the Blackhawks next season? I'm going to go out on a limb and say Anders Sorensen. I think he's done a really good job to start. And although the Blackhawks are certainly willing and will likely still open up a search and do a very detailed process, I think he's going to be given every opportunity to earn this job. I think he's provided a breath of fresh air. He's very communicative. The players have talked about the fact that he's really vocal behind the bench, which is something that, not a knock on him, but I don't think Luke Richardson was very vocal behind the bench. Pretty stoic guy. And he's also given them some explanation and reasoning for what he's looking for. When players make a mistake, they know exactly where the mistake happened and whose fault it was. And I think that can be really refreshing for players, is understanding those expectations. And he also speaks a high-skilled game. Luke Richardson, for better or for worse, was a 1,400-plus game, meat-and-potatoes NHL defenseman. Not flashy, not sexy. But when you're dealing with Connor Bedard and, some other high-end players on the Hawks that are on the way, you've got to be able to speak a different language. And I think Sorensen does that. He's been with the Nylander boys, Alex and Will Williams, since they were 6 and 7 years old. He's traveled with them around the world, a close family friend. He's coached David Pasternak as a teenager. This is a guy who understands the high-end game, speaks that type of language, and that's the language that I think you need to unlock Connor Bedard. And you've certainly seen Bedard play with a bit more swagger since the coaching change, and the Hawks have had a much better record since then as well. Back to the Sabres, because Mike in Amherst, New York asks, you are in charge of taking the reins for the Sabres going forward. What are you doing to get them back to competitive status and fighting for a playoff spot? Man, this is a tough question. I think they've got some really hard decisions to make, but I'm going to start with this. I think you've got to trade one of either Owen Power or Rasmus Dahlin. And I know that's a really unpopular statement to make. I know that that's probably even daring or bold. I just think the way that team defends has not been nearly good enough. And at one point or another, it feels like these high-end number one overall picks have, not that they've been in the way, they just haven't been probably as good as they should be at times, and definitely not nearly as consistent. So someone will provide you really good value for one of these players, and maybe that's exactly what you need to go in a different direction. It's going to be a really difficult transaction to make, hard to get equal value, but I feel like every time I'm watching the Sabres, I see one of them making a mistake that just ends up really quickly in the back of their net. And not all of it's their fault, and I'm not saying they're scapegoats or anything like that, but there's been so much talk about Dylan Cousins and Jack Quinn and Bowen Byram. Maybe it needs to be bigger than just talking about your third and fourth defenseman or third line players or a top end center in Dylan Cousins. Maybe it needs to be something pretty seismic in order to change things for real for the Sabres. Our friend Johnny Lazarus in New York City asks, what moment from your career are you most proud of, one that you look back on and smile about? I'm going to go back to the very beginning. My family is in the construction business, and when I was a kid, every time I'd go in to visit my dad at work, everyone that would gather around for lunch, sit around the lunchroom, probably 15, 20 people in there at a time eating lunch. And every time there would be a couple Philadelphia Daily News newspapers there, and different time, of course, everyone read the paper at lunch. It was how you caught up. People would talk about it. But my uncles, my dad, everyone read that one specific paper. It was the sports paper, maybe the best sports section in the country. And ever since I was a kid, I was like, I'd love to be able to have a chance to work there. And so really, when I was an intern, when I first got my first back page cover story, when I was hired full time to become the Flyers beat reporter there, it just filled me with so much pride to know that, my dad and his family and everyone that worked there, they would see my work on a daily basis. And it was it wasn't just that I wanted to be in hockey or I wanted to be a hockey reporter, but it was that one specific paper. I really cherished my first 6 years that I worked at the Philadelphia Daily News before moving on to TSN, and obviously fortuitous timing on my end with just the way the media landscape has changed. Knock on wood, I've been able to really kind of stay one step ahead of the changing evolution, and I look on my wall over here. I've got a bunch of credentials in my office, in my studio here, and seeing Philadelphia Daily News, I think that's the coolest thing ever. Shane Moberg asks, how do hockey players get paid? Is it weekly after every game, once a year or a season, at the beginning of the season? Nope. Shane, they get paid kind of like everyone else. They get paid on the 15th and 30th. They only get paid days worked. So think about the NHL season. It's divided by 194 days this year because of the lengthened Four Nations Faceoff break. So let's say your salary is $8 million a year. Well, each day then you earn, let's do the math on the fly. Each day you earn $41,237. And so for every single day that goes by, you earn $41,000, and each paycheck for you would be roughly worth $618,556. And so you get paid from the start of the regular season. Your first date working, so to speak, training camp, players do not get paid. First working day is the day before the NHL regular season opens, and it goes from then all the way till the last day of the regular season. And then after that, it's just a playoff bonus pool that gets split up should you make it. And if not, your team doesn't make the playoffs, you're done getting paid in April, and you do not get paid again until October. KJ wants to know, do you still have a favorite NHL team? Is it hard to stay neutral or level-headed about your team during tense moments? KJ, unfortunately, I do not have a favorite NHL team, or I should say fortunately, and it's not hard for me to separate that. I did grow up a Flyers fan, but when I started covering the team back in 2007-8 on a pretty regular basis, being around that every day, you lose that fan part of it. It becomes, it's not jaded, but it's going to work. Your job is to cover the team impartially, to build that trust with the accurate coverage that I was talking about. And for me, I was able to park that. I'm not impartial to anyone winning. I root for good stories. I root for the fastest way to get to the bar after a game if I'm on the road traveling. I root for good people. I root for people that I've developed relationships with. And there's so many of them, no matter which team ends up winning, that there's always someone that you can smile and feel really good about. So no skin in the game for me. I did mention earlier that maybe at some point in my life, I'd like to have that, but I also really enjoy not having the stresses of that. I say all the time, this job is stressful enough without having to worry about the wins and losses. So if you were to factor that in and also put your job on the line with the wins and losses, kind of feels good parking a lot of that and being a media guy. Trin in Grand Prairie, Alberta asks, hey Frank, will we ever see a time when officials have to do press conferences? People make mistakes and they are human, but I believe respect would go a long way to officials from fans if they had to answer questions about a questionable call they made. Just my 2 cents. Trin, I'm fully with you, 100%. For one, behind the scenes, I've been advocating for a pool reporter to just be able to, one person after games, if there's something that we see that we don't understand, doesn't make sense, go ask a question. And that person will provide the answers to the rest of the media group. It's civilized. It's not biting. It's not accusatory. It's just, hey, could you provide your point of view? Because I think sometimes there's so many things happening on the ice that if an official were just able to explain what he was seeing, that I think we'd all be able to grasp that. To your point, Trin, they are human. They do make mistakes. And I do like what the NFL and NBA do. They're not afraid to send out a release saying, we got that one wrong. And instead, it feels like the NHL has its head buried in the sand. They say, we've got the best officials in the world. Well, like, of course you do in hockey, but doesn't mean that they don't make mistakes. And so pretending like every single call that's made is correct, it's nonsensical. We all know that's not the case. So having that, it's not accountability, but just being able to check everyone, which they're graded privately. They all know the mistakes they make. The officials, supervisors, managers, the hockey ops department, they know what mistakes are being made, which is how you have different grades, and these guys end up advancing through the playoffs to get these promotions and get the best games. They want the best officials. It's okay to let the fans, the public that's paying for the entertainment value, to understand and be able to grasp that information and intel as well. And I think the NBA does it in a way that's, it's not super biting. Everyone knows what they're signing up for when they become an official. They know you're going to be criticized. To have the league admit you got that wrong, that's just a fact of life. Glenner asks, if you had to pick one team to relocate, who would it be and to where? I mentioned earlier in the show, Glenner, that I don't think we have any problem spots in today's NHL. I wouldn't relocate one team, but man, it just makes way too much sense to me to have a second team playing in Toronto. I can't believe that we've arrived at that part. Look at baseball. 2 teams in New York, 2 teams in Chicago, 2 teams there was 2 teams in the Bay Area. Why can't there be 2 teams in the hockey mecca that is Toronto? It just doesn't make any sense to me. I think they'd have to consider that the next time around, even if it means paying the Toronto Maple Leafs an indemnification to invade their market, even if it means having those 2 teams share Scotiabank Arena like Staples Center was in LA forever with the NBA. I just think it works, and I think you should tackle that and get into that. That would help certainly raise the tide for all boats around the NHL, the number 1 revenue producing team in the country. Kyle in Parry Sound, Ontario says, how do you stay on top of everything going on in the NHL on a night-to-night basis? Kyle, the answer is I don't get off my phone hardly ever, which is why I really enjoyed the Christmas holidays. The league goes dark December 24th, 25th, and 26th, and I get a chance to put down my phone. My screen time on a daily basis is hovering somewhere between 10 and 13 hours a day, which is way too much. And at night, usually after it all ends, I'm watching games. I'm awake in the morning. I have a TV in my bathroom. I turn on NHL Network and I'm watching highlights. I'm scrolling and zooming through topics on Twitter constantly, seeing clips. People are texting and calling, even late, talking to people on the West Coast, 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning. My phone is buzzing and my wife hates it. But it's just part of the gig, and you never really get a chance to turn off. And the big benefit for me is get a chance to really decompress in the summer, which I highly value. Our friend Kerry McGowan asks a red wine lifestyle question. He says, I have a Brunello query for you. Biondi, Santi, or Solera? And I haven't had either one of those, Kerry, but I can throw out a couple Brunello questions or queries for you to go run down yourself. I had a chance to go when I was in Tuscany to go to Montalcino, which is the home of Brunello wine, if you're into red wine. And I'll give you 2 of my favorites. Casanova de Neri is one, and that one's relatively easy to find. And the other one is Poggio de Soto. 2 of the best wines in the world. Love California Cab. Love of really good Brunello, and I just find that it just agrees with me. So if you're looking for an old school Italian term, I don't get any agita when I drink Brunello. So thanks for the red wine lifestyle question, Kerry. Jay Cool asks, your thoughts on the NHL dropping to the 5th most popular sport by viewership in the United States. It feels like kind of a long time coming when you look at their ratings, and when you look at what else is coming, Jay, whether it's WNBA, women's soccer, F1, these are all, hugely popular sports that are growing fan bases. And it's a one reason why, not just viewership, but also the participation in the sport for kids has me highly concerned. I wrote a story back on U.S. Thanksgiving. It was entitled something like Sounding the Alarm on the future state of the game. And I presented a lot of different data points. Some people viewed it as hyperbole. I can tell you that More than a dozen NHL GMs reached out to say that they agreed with the article and the thought process. Team presidents, owners also connected. The fact of the matter is this: there's 40,000 fewer players, boys aged 5 to 18, playing hockey than there were 10 years ago. It's a 12% drop in Canada. Participation in the U.S. in the same age group has increased less than 2% in the last 10 years. I think we're at a critical juncture. The cost of the game is way too expensive to play, and that's how you grow your fan base, getting young hockey players involved to want to play the game. Those are your core fans for life, and we're having a hard time recruiting those. Some of the best athletes now in Canada are choosing other sports. It's an access issue. There's not enough rinks. It's not about free equipment. It's about more rinks. And we've got to find a way to stop focusing as a game on the elite players, the kids and families that want to pay $12,000 a season to play. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just what gets lost in that is all the sort of traditional mid-level hockey players, the single A players, the house league players, the recreation players that all need a place to play. And if you're a rink owner, think about it from a business perspective. Would you rather cater to 200 players or 250 players that are willing to pay $12,000 a year? Or would you rather cater to 600 players who are going to pay $1,500 a year? That's where we've arrived at now because we don't have any rinks. So please check out the story, Jay, and let me know your thoughts. Gavin in Montreal wants to know, with Montreal's recent insurgence of Patrick Laine, do the Habs stay the course or do they become more aggressive buyers? I think they stay the course. Patrick Laine has given this team a shot in the arm, but they know that they're a bit of a ways off to being a team that's contending for a playoff spot. I think one more year, we're going to see a different look Canadiens blue line. I'll be curious to see what they do at the deadline. They'll move David Savard if they can. I don't think they really want to trade Mike Matheson, but they may be forced to, depending on what the defense market looks like. I think the Habs have a better than average or a close to being NHL playoff ready forward group. Obviously, getting Slavkovsky going again is going to be a big part of that. But I'm bullish on where the Canadiens are heading. It might feel like it's been slow now, but I think they're on the right track. Forklift guy in British Columbia wants to know, was being an insider your dream job back then? If not, what was your dream job if there was one? Well, I always wanted to be a hockey reporter. I never really thought about what that might look like or what form it might be in. Insider, I can't really say was at the top of my list, but when I was a teenager and I was in high school and I was figuring out, I was a AAA player. I played junior B as a 15-year-old. And when I figured out that I wasn't going to be good enough to play hockey at a super high level, I knew I wanted to find a way to continue to work in the game. And I was just writing for a local hockey magazine that was published for free in the rinks. It was called Breakaway Magazine if you're on the East Coast. It was in rinks basically everywhere from Virginia to Maine. They covered the local junior leagues. They covered high school hockey. They covered a lot of different stuff. And those guys were so unbelievable to me as a kid, giving me experience, hands-on learning. I translated that into working at a local paper, and then, on to the big paper in the city. And incredibly fortunate. I knew I wanted to be a hockey reporter. I had no idea what that would look like. Would I be doing it on radio, on TV, only writing? And now to be able to do all those different things and touch all those different platforms, that part has been incredible. So I'd say this has probably been better than my dream job and what I thought that it might be. Ragnar in Ottawa asks, thoughts on Nick Jensen? Been a savior for us. Yes, I must eat some humble pie. Although Jacob Chychrun has still been really good in Washington, and I think they're happy, I was down on this trade from the beginning because I thought that it was a mismatch in assets. Yes, I know the market is only what the market bears. Your car is only worth what someone's willing to pay you for it. And so if the Ottawa Senators were trying to move Jacob Chychrun and that's all they could get for him, then I understand that's the case. But I miscalculated how valuable Jensen would be. I thought he was kind of on hole 16 or 17 of his career, but he's been so good defensively. And the big thing that I just continue to marvel at with Nick Jensen is how he handles pressure. when teams are on the forecheck bearing down on him, he doesn't panic. He doesn't give the puck away. And for an Ottawa team that's defended so much better this year, that's been a huge part of it, is play in their own end. It's not nearly as scrambly. And I think Jensen has a huge part of that as well. Thanks to Ragnar in Ottawa for that question. And, please, happy to eat a healthy dose of humble pie. Carson, the Flyers truther, asks, is the league concerned about major U.S. market teams continuing to struggle? He points to Detroit, who made a coaching change with Derek Lalonde out and Todd McClellan in, Chicago, and Philadelphia. I would say, Carson, it's really just cyclical. Like, think back to, and the reason I thought about this is because a question that my Daily Faceoff Live co-host Tyler Yaremchuk, he threw at me, he said, if you could win $1 million if you could pick one team that's not going to win a Stanley Cup in the next 20 years. And I was thinking, okay, well, let's go back 20 years. Let's go back even 10 years. Who were the problem franchises? Who were the teams that weren't winning? And what are they doing now? And if you look back on it, all the teams that were down then are kind of up now. All of the teams that were up then are down now. It's the nature of the salary cap world and pro sports. It's constantly evolving and changing. It's a little bit like if you were to think about, college sports and recruiting, and, sometimes you're going to have some really good years with some seniors, and other years you're going to have some years that you're going to be really dependent on some freshmen. I think that's like hockey's got a bit of that as well because of the hard salary cap. And I think for that reason, Chicago had like one of the best runs that any team could have over a 10-year period of time. 3 Stanley Cups, a team that was on the rise for a long time, captivated an enormous market in the U.S., and now they're going through it because they were so committed to winning that they traded away a lot of the draft picks required to have a sustained run of success. There's only so many teams in the league that can balance all of that and do it at once, like Carolina's trying to do, where you get a 10-year period of time where you have a chance to win every year. The difference between Carolina, which has been a really good team in the league for the last 5 years, and Chicago is that Chicago actually did it and won it. So are you willing to trade going in and going all in and trying to win for a sustained period of time and success? Does that shorten your window? I think a really valid question to ask, Carson, but certainly something pretty interesting. But I don't think the league is concerned. Charles Uhl is in Elliott Lake, Ontario, and he wants to know, can you talk about a trade that you sat on because you needed confirmation which never came and the deal broke down? So I kind of touched on that one with the Zach Parise going from Minnesota to the Islanders. But I'd say they usually always kind of make it out, Charles. Think back to the trade this past summer where the Carolina Hurricanes, I guess they're pretty thankful they didn't trade Marty Necas, but they were pretty close to moving him to the Buffalo Sabres, and he nixed the deal because he wasn't willing to sign an extension with the Sabres as a restricted free agent. I think they were also probably at varying points pretty close with the Ducks on a deal that could have involved Trevor Zegras, but look, there's always stuff happening that gets closer that doesn't end up making it out. That I guess a lot of it, though, we do find out about it. PDO King says, how hard have all the miles been? I don't know, man. Just look at me. I'm 36, and every year I've got about 100,000 miles on the road. I do about 125 nights a year on the road, give or take. And yeah, I guess I could probably just take better care of myself. And Greg, in a similar vein, says, how long have you had gray hair? The answer is, since I was about 20. Runs in the family. Both of my grandparents, they're not gray. They are like, their hair is snow white. And I have them to thank and or blame for that. I guess at the end of the day, I'm just thankful that I have a full head of hair. And hopefully I will be blessed follically moving forward with that hair. That said, I definitely obviously look a little bit older because of my weight. As mentioned, could take care of myself a bit better, but try not to be too hard on myself. There's only so many things that you can focus on in any given day, and I've just been so obsessed with this job in terms of getting it right. And then when I'm not doing that, I'm coaching my son's team. I'm running the Professional Hockey Writers Association. I'm helping grow a business. There's just a million things that are on your plate on a sun up to sundown basis that for me, I've just tried to take it a little bit easier and get to the gym a few days a week at 6 a.m. in the morning, just trying to slowly change my lifestyle to be better off for my family in the long run. But I appreciate all the questions and jokes about my hair along the way. And I'll end it today with this last one from Kelly Jones, who says, what keeps your passion for the game from waning? I think just realizing every day, Kelly, how lucky I am. The fact that I get to talk hockey for a living. We've got an incredible loyal fan base that follows and watches along. I just feel like I'm such an incredibly lucky guy to be able to do this. And I don't take a single day of that for granted, and just try and put in a true honest effort every single day, just like anyone else would be going to work. And hopefully that pays off. Not everyone's going to like me. There are some days that are harder than others for some of the reasons mentioned. It is hard to sometimes not get swept up in social media and how things work and the different emotional swings that come with it. Some days are good, some days are bad, but at the end of the day, I'm getting to talk and watch a game that I grew up playing and loved so much and still do. And it's just really lucky guy. So really appreciate everyone's questions. This has been a different Q&A, a different style of Frankly Speaking. Hope you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed answering them. And that'll do it for this week's edition of Frankly Speaking, which is presented by Betway. 19 plus, please play responsibly. If you're going to place a bet on Betway. Talk to you soon.
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Seravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe button.